This is a CBS News special report. I'm Margaret Brennan in Washington. We are interrupting your regularly scheduled programming because state police in Texas are providing an update right now into the investigation into Tuesday's deadly mass shootings in Uvalde. Let's listen in.
Rangers under the Department of Public Safety assume lead responsibility of this horrific murder of 19 innocent child and 2 adults. Our goal today is to provide the parents, the community of Uvalde, the public, as much information as we can on where we are on the investigation. We're here to report the facts as we know them now, not to defend what was done or to criticize what was done or the actions taken. I'll begin first and foremost with the timeline as we know it. The second timeline I'll discuss is the 911 timeline. Then we'll talk about the relevant social or digital media footprint of the subject. Then we'll also have plenty of time for questions at that point. At 11:27, we know from video evidence, at 11:27, the exterior door suspected of where we knew the shooter entered, Ramos, was propped open by a teacher. 11:28, the suspect vehicle crashes into the ditch, as previously described. The teacher runs to the room 132 to retrieve a phone, and that same teacher walks back to the exit door, and door remains propped open. There were 2 males, as reported by Regional Director Escalon yesterday. There were 2 males at a funeral home that when they heard the crash, they went to the crash scene. When they arrived at the crash scene, before they got there, they saw a man with a gun exit the passenger side with a backpack. They immediately began running. Ramos began shooting at him. Did not hit him. One of the males fell when he was running. Both males returned to the funeral home while they're running. And then again, we see through video, teacher reemerges inside the school in panic and apparently calls 911. 911 call at 11:30. There was a crash, man with a gun. 11:31. The suspect reaches last row of vehicles in the school parking lot. 11:31, the suspect shooting began at the school while patrol vehicles got to the funeral home. I'll point out where it is. Crashed vehicle's over here. Suspect hiding behind a vehicle, started walking down, shooting into the classroom. There was discussion early on, ISD, Consolidated ISD for Uvalde, was a resource officer and had confronted the subject. That did not happen, as R.D. Escalon talked about yesterday. It was certainly stated in preliminary interviews, but often these preliminary interviews and a cursory walkthrough doesn't reveal the type of information, and certainly, police officers, like anyone else, under stress, sometimes witnesses get it wrong. But the bottom line is that officer was not on scene, not on campus, but had heard the 911 call with a man with a gun, drove immediately to the area, sped to what he thought was the man with a gun, to the back of the school, what turned out to be a teacher, and not the suspect. In doing so, he drove right by the suspect, who was hunkered down behind a vehicle, where he began shooting at the school. At 11:31, the suspect shooting in between the vehicle is when it began, while patrol vehicle gets to the funeral home. Multiple shots are fired outside the school at 11:31. Patrol car accelerates into the parking lot, drives by the shooter. That's exactly what I was talking about. That was the ISD officer at that time. He passes and then leaves the camera view. There's multiple shots fired at the school at 11:32, at 11:32:27, 11:32:36. At 11:33 is when the suspect entered the school at the door that I'm pointing to now. At 11:33, the suspect began shooting into room 111 or 112. It's not possible to determine from the video angle that we have at this point in time. We do know this, that he shot more than 100 rounds based on the audio evidence at that time, at least 100 rounds. He entered at 11:33, or 11:33, he started shooting in the classrooms, 111 and 112. And 11:35, 3 police officers entered the same door as the suspect entered. All 3 of those police officers worked for the Uvalde Police Department. They were later followed by another 4, a team of Uvalde police officers, 3, and also a county deputy sheriff. So a total of 7 officers were on the scene. The 3 initial police officers that arrived went directly to the door, and 2 received grazing wounds at that time from the suspect while the door was closed. At 11:37, there was more gunfire. Another 16 rounds was fired at 11:37. 1 at 11:37 and 16 seconds, 11:38, 11:40, 11:44. At 11:51, a police sergeant and USB agents started to arrive. At 12:03, officers continued to arrive in the hallway, and there were as many as 19 officers at that time in that hallway. At 12:15, we know that BORTAC members arrived. Not the entire BORTAC, but members of BORTAC, along with Shields. At 12:21, the suspect fired again, was believed to be at the door. At 11:21, law enforcement moved down the hallway. At 11:50, they breached the door using keys that they're able to get from the janitor because both doors were locked. Though both of the classrooms that he shot into were locked when officers arrived. They killed the suspect at that time. And now I'd like to go over the 911 timeline. Which I'll warn you is not. It's better that I read it than you listen to it. The caller identified, I'll not say her name, but she was in room 112, called 911 at 12:03. The duration of the call was 1 minute and 23 seconds. She identified herself and whispered she's in room 112. At 12:10, she called back in room 12, advised her multiple dead. 12:13, again she called on the phone. Again at 12:16, she called back and said there was 8 to 9 students alive. At 12:19, the 911 call was made, and another person in room 111 called. I will not say her name. She hung up when another student told her to hang up. At 12:21, you could hear over the 911 call that 3 shots were fired. At 12:36, 911 call, it lasted for 21 seconds. The initial caller called back, student, child, called back, was told to stay on the line and be very quiet. She told 911 that he shot the door. At approximately 12:43 and 12:47, she asked 911 to please send the police now. At 12:46, she said that she could hear the police next door. At 12:50, shots are fired. They can be heard over the 911 call. And at 12:51 is very loud and sounds like the officers are moving children out of the room. At that time, the first child that called was outside before the call cuts off. Additional information that we have is that there are 58 total magazines at the school related to the crime scene. 11 of those magazines were inside the school. 3 were on the suspect's body, 2 in room 112, 6 inside room 111, 5 were on the ground, 1 was in the rifle. There were 32 magazines outside the school, but on school property, 1 just outside the school building and 31 in the suspect's backpack that he did not take into the classrooms with him. There was 15 magazines at the crash site. There were 2 magazines at the suspect's residence for a total of 60 magazines. He had purchased and had a total of 1,657 total rounds of ammunition. 315 of those rounds were inside the school. 142 of those were spent cartridges. 173 were live rounds. 922 were outside of the school, but on school property. 22 of those were spent cartridges. 900 were live rounds. 422 were at the crash site. 22 were spent cartridges. 420 of those were live rounds. There's 35 spent law enforcement cartridges total in the school. 8 of those were in the hallway. 27 were inside the classroom. 111 where the suspect was killed. I had mentioned that I'm going to go over quickly a digital timeline. One thing we talked about early, and I want to correct something that was said early on in the investigation, is that he posted, okay, on Facebook publicly that he was going to kill that he was going to shoot his grandmother, and secondly after that he was going to, that he had shot her, and then third that he was going to go shoot up a school. That did not happen. It was actually on a message. It was a Facebook application, messenger application to somebody else that he had a conversation with. We know that through his digital media footprint, and I'll just do by date time, that Ramos asked his sister to help him buy a gun. She flatly refused. That was in September of 21. I'll avoid some of these and get to he had Instagram, a 4-group chat, and it was discussed that Ramos being a school shooter. That was on February 28th of 2022. On March 1st of 2022, there was an Instagram he had with 4 people. It was a chat. He discussed him buying a gun. On March 3rd, 2022, there was another 4-person chat. Quotations, word on the street is you are buying a gun. Ramos replied, just bought something. RN. On March 14th, and there was an Instagram posting by the subject, in quotations, 10 more days. A user replied, are you going to shoot up school or something? The subject replied, no, and stop asking dumb questions and you'll see. I know you have many questions, and I've agreed to stay as long as we can to answer as many of those questions that we can. If I can't answer it because we don't know definitively right now, I'll simply say that. And it continues to be a preliminary investigation. There's, literally, certainly over hundreds of interviews that have been conducted, will continue to be conducted, and there's thousands of leads that are being pursued, not consecutively, but concurrently. And thanks to our federal and local partners, and I do want to mention behind me, we've got the FBI Special Agent in Charge. We also have an ATF Special Agent in Charge, or ASAC, and of course, who else? What I got behind? Okay, but Texas Rangers, if there's any specifics that I haven't covered that I might need their particular support on. I do want to cover one thing quickly, though, before I go to questions, and that's some of the questions that we received, that we have already received. And one of those is going around now that in fact, the subject had been one of the 2 arrested by the Texas Rangers and the local police back in 2018. That's not the case. He was not one of the individuals. In fact, we have found no links, associations, and relationships in that investigation Clearly, it was a threat. It was back in 2018. The two juveniles were charged with attempted or conspiracy to commit capital murder. There's no question that we thought, and we had evidence, and certainly the district attorney agreed, that these juveniles, one 13, one 14 years old, was a threat to Uvalde. And there was a discussion at that time, even the senior year of the one that was 14 years old, which would make it 2022. However, that was not the subject. Questions?
Your answers. Okay. Tony's going to translate in Spanish.
Okay. Oh yeah. Oh, one thing I want to say. One thing I failed to say is that when we're done, we have Tony Peña with us. He's going to translate into Spanish. Okay, what the answers and the questions are afterwards. Yeah.
Said the microphone, otherwise the camera. Thank you for doing this, and I do hope you stay here and take as many questions as possible. You say there were 19 officers gathered in the hallway or somewhere. What efforts were made to try and break through that door? You say it was locked. What efforts were the officers making to try and break through either that door or another door, get inside that classroom?
None at that time.
Why?
The on-scene commander at the time believed that it had transitioned from an active shooter to a barricaded subject.
Sir, you have people who are alive, children who are calling 911 saying, please send the police. They are alive in that classroom. There are lives that are at risk.
We're well aware of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Why was this decision made not to go in and rescue these children?
Again, the on-scene commander considered it a barricaded subject and that there was time and there were no more children at risk. Obviously, based upon the information we have, there were children in that classroom that were at risk, and it was, in fact, still an active shooter situation and not a barricaded subject.
Sir, why was the door back? To understand that there were 911 calls coming in from 12:10, right? And the suspect was taken out at 12:50. 40 minutes during which, sorry, I'm tethered here, yeah. There was a 40-minute time span from those 911 calls coming in, right? And you probably have dispatchers relaying information to officers on the scene, telling them, hey, there are children in that classroom. They're still being shot right now. They're still being alive. How come the decision wasn't made? Whatever assets go on hand. Thank you.
The question simply is this. There was a 40-minute gap. And if the 911 operators were aware that children were alive in that classroom, why weren't officers notified of that? And if that's the case, why didn't they take action? That's the question. And again, I'll go back to the answer for right now, is that it was considered, okay, the decision was made on the scene. I wasn't there, but at the same point in time, a decision was made that this was a barricaded subject situation. There was time to retrieve the keys and wait for a tactical team with the equipment to go ahead and breach the door and take on the subject at that point. That was the decision, that was the thought process at that particular point in time. What?
What can you tell parents that were here waiting and asking for the police to go in?
Is there an apology for them?
And there was 19, like I said, there was 19 officers in there. In fact, there was plenty of officers to do whatever needed to be done, with one exception, is that the incident commander inside believed they needed more equipment and more officers to do a tactical breach at that point. That's why board tac was requested on the scene. As soon as they were there, they executed a search, or at least a dynamic entry, and went in. And of course, that was not till 12. That was not till 12:57. With the benefit of hindsight. Stand by. Right? I got it. Okay. Hey, for the benefit of hindsight, where I'm sitting now, of course it was not the right decision. It was the wrong decision. Period. There's no excuse for that. But again, I wasn't there, but I'm just telling you, from what we know, we believe there should have been an entry at that as soon as you can. Hey, when there's an active shooter, the rules change. It's no longer, okay, it's no longer a barricaded subject. You don't have time. You don't worry about outer perimeters. And by the way, Texas embraces active shooter training, active shooter certification, and that doctrine requires officers, we don't care what agency you're from, you don't have to have a leader on the scene. Every officer lines up, stacks up, goes and finds where those rounds are being fired at and keeps shooting until the subject is dead, period.
Why was the decision made? What is your message for the parents?
Mexico, sir. Obviously, south of the border, it's very difficult to understand how the most powerful nations of the world, the citizens have access to high-end weapons, and this is happening over and over and over again, and now getting children. I don't mean to want the time for you guys are the expert on questions, please. How can you keep this from happening again in the communities of Texas? And second, how did a 18-year-old kid that works at a Wendy's wage and buy a $5,000 weapon?
Well, answer the last. He used a debit card first, but to your point, it's very expensive, and a debit card is not a credit card. It means he had money in the bank. So why and how is being looked at right now, and I'll tell you this, thousands of more leads are being looked at right now because we haven't answered all the questions. We haven't gotten into the why. Okay, we know the individual was also into cyber gaming in that regard, and group gaming in that regard. So we've got a lot of questions are out there, and we're seeking answers, but we've got an obligation. We'll continue to update you when we find something out. Hey,
Mendoza from VOA News. I have two questions. The first one is being said that Border Patrol had the special team on site and the local police did not allow them to go into the building. Can you elaborate why that was?
The Border Patrol agents, the BORTAC agents that were in the building, did line up. They're part of the 19 that I talked about, and the entry team, ultimately the entry team that went in. But I can tell you that they were told, just as any other officer was told, and others, even command staff that came on board, is that the incident commander at the time believed that in fact it was a barricaded subject, that we had time, there was no kids at risk.
He has talked about having chats and group chats and talking to people. Why wasn't he on any radar? Nobody.
I wish he was. Because then there's no question. And I'll say this right now. But every time we have one of these, and there's copycats, okay? And we need the public, just like we did back in 2018, that was a public, okay, that came forward that we got 2 people that are about to shoot up a school or planned to shoot a school. It's imperative on the public, when you get something, just because the guy sounds like he's a nut, he may be a nut. But just because it sounds like, well, impossible to do, he may be intended to do, as I read the timeline based upon the chats that he had. So we need everyone, when we have a threat to life like that, to take it seriously and report it, because ultimately this is tragic. What do you tell the parents of 19 kids, or the families of two teachers? Yeah. Or the pay.
Yes, sir. Morgan Chesky, NBC News. You said you wanted to wait for tactical gear. By 12:15, you had at least 15 officers and shields on scene.
Yeah.
Yet you did not reach the door until 12:50.
Hey, like I've said it before, is that, well, first of all, when it comes to an active shooter, you don't have to wait on tactical gear. Plain and simple, you got an obligation. What I know now, okay, absolutely, it was an active shooter, because you can transition. Keep in mind, in the doctrine, okay, of active shooters, you can transition from an active shooter situation to a barricaded subject, or a barricaded with hostage subject. But if shooting continues, and you have any reason to believe that there's individuals alive in there, you've got an obligation to move back to an active shooter posture, and that means everybody at the door.
At 12:03, you got a 911 call from the teacher saying there were children alive in classroom 112, 8 to 9 children. Is that teacher, are those children still alive? And why was the school resource officer off campus? And did Uvalde SWAT respond to the scene?
Well, Uvalde has a part-time SWAT team, number one. The ISD's got, they've limited officers. I think, what is it? Well, you got 6. They got six, yeah, the consolidated independent school district has 6 officers, and they didn't have one posted at that location. And someone said, hey, what do you tell the parents? I mean, bottom line is that, or someone talked about and said, when there's kids in the room, why wasn't there an entry? Because it was believed, like I said at the time, that the subject was stationary, barricaded, there was no risk to other children. Again, on retrospect, from where I'm sitting right now, clearly there was kids in the room. Clearly, okay, they're at risk. And oh, by the way, even when you go back to shooting, there may be kids that are injured. Okay, they may have been shot but injured, and it's important for life-saving purposes to immediately get there and render aid.
Did the caller survive?
Where was the resource officer? Why was he not on campus?
He was not on campus.
Why? Where was he?
Again, we'll have all those answers down the road. Okay.
Sir, did those callers survive?
Yeah.
Thank you for the invitation. Much of them are undocumented. It's them in the world. We apologize to all the parents. We're outside screaming, trying to get in. Answer my question. Their help would have been great. Some parents were able to get their children out of this. Not as a police officer, not as somebody that becomes the government, but as a parent, as a human being. What do you say to those parents who are about to bury their children?
Well, first I want to say that the Consolidated Independent School District officers were there early. There was 4 of them, and they immediately began evacuating the school and did that throughout the process. So keep in mind, so that was going on. And what do I say to the parents? I don't have anything to say to the parents other than what had happened. We're not here to defend what happened. We're here to report the facts so they have the facts. Yeah. Hey, bottom line, the consultant. I'm sorry? Oh, I don't have any information on that. Oh, one second though. However, we did review of what DPS officers arrived on the scene, what they did, and looked at those instances.
You know the parents of the children who died are watching right now, and they're hearing you say that not everything that could possibly have been done as humanly fast as it could be done was done. Are they owed an apology from somebody, be it the incident commander and the police department here?
If I thought it would help, I would apologize. Okay. But let me say this. Hey, let me say this.
Hold on.
When you go back to the timeline, again, I want to go back and I'm not defending anything, but you go back to the timeline. There was a barrage. Hundreds of rounds were pumped in 4 minutes. Okay, into those 2 classrooms. Then anything else, any firing afterwards was sporadic, and it was at the door. So the belief is that there may not be anybody living anymore, and that the subject is now trying to keep law enforcement at bay or entice them to come in to suicide by contact. I understand that. I reported that.
Jack Morpus in the New York Post. Can I ask 2 questions? First of all, exactly how was the gunman barricaded in his room? Was it just a simple matter of him locking the door behind him? And secondly, did he fire all 1,657 rounds from away to start back into that start?
Well, I might answer the first one, but the why on the second one I don't have. The first one, that each door can lock from the inside, and both doors were locked, okay, from the inside. So the subject, when he went in, he locked the door. He came out one time into the hallway, went back in and locked the door, because at the time that the officers went in, both doors were locked. They got a key from the janitor and used it.
First call came in inside the classroom at 12:03 and you breached it at 12:51. How many students died in those 48 minutes?
I don't have that answer. We're looking at it right now.
Why wasn't the school placed on lockdown? And 2, while this may be the most unpopular question here today, what is on your heart? How are you doing? been shaking the whole time you're up there.
Yeah, thanks a lot. You know, forget how I'm doing. What about the parents of those children? And forget about me. What about me or officers and stuff like that? We take an oath to uphold the law and protect people. And anytime something tragic like that, we want to know why it happened and if we can do better next time, is the bottom line. And call it like it is. It is tragic. Quite frankly, I mean, there shouldn't be anybody. You know, ideally, we'd been able to identify this guy as a suspect and address it before he even thought about attacking, on the 24th.
Green. Go ahead.
There's a lot of ammunition, a lot of rounds. But there are other people that you're looking at to arrest. That hated them.
And we're looking at other people. Absolutely. Anybody who's been in contact, we're looking at anything. Links associations, people that may have known something, and will continue, and may have been involved in some chat room gaming along with them. So there's nobody that we're not going to talk to and look at. And it's certainly, I can assure you that the district attorney is very proactive and very concerned about this, and that if any evidence that we bring to her that someone was an accomplice or an enabler or didn't do what they should have done, if it's in violation of the law and it meets the probable cause standards, I have no doubt that she'll take care of business just like she did back in 2018 when we had 2 juveniles plot a capital murder at the school.
You had 911. You had 911 calls at 12:10, 12:13,
Yes.
12:16. The shooter wasn't killed until 12:50. Did any of those 911 callers survive?
Yes. I can't tell you that with certainty, but more than one survived.
How many children got
Sorry, what?
Can you give us an update on the number of officers interned or conditioned where they are now? And also, were there any windows in the classroom itself?
Yes, the windows I'll go backwards. Right over here. I'll move over here. Something shot into these windows right here as he's approaching the door.
You have been listening to an ongoing press conference in Uvalde, Texas, where Steve McCraw, the director of the Texas Public Safety Department, is explaining what happened with the deadly school shooting and has revealed some stunning details, admitting that mistakes were made on the ground when it came to the response that day. He said, among other things, there was no school resource officer on site, no ISD officer when the shooting began. He said there were more than 600 rounds of ammunition carried into that school by the shooter. To put that in perspective, that is more than 2 times what a U.S. soldier would take into combat. 210 rounds is what a soldier carries. He said it was the wrong decision made on the scene by the responding commanding officer to transition from an active shooter to a barricaded suspect protocol, explaining there that there were children trapped inside those classrooms, fearing for their lives and calling 911. There were concurrent 911 calls being made by trapped students at the same time that the responding commanding officer said that the active shooter threat had transitioned into a barricaded suspect protocol, meaning that is why officers didn't rush in to rescue them from these classrooms where they were trapped with doors locked and gunshots being fired. Also revealed that there is social media chatter going back to February of 2022. And Director McCraw, as you could see, did get emotional there, saying there is no excuse for what happened. I want to get some perspective on what we just learned from a former FBI official who is with us. Her name is Kathy Guider. Kathy, from what you just heard, it is hard, I know, to second guess what happens in the heat of the moment, but these seem to be major tactical mistakes as being described by McCraw.
It's hard for me to say at this point because I was not there. I don't have the intelligence that they had on the spot. As he said, every situation, there's going to be an after action report. And so not only right now are they investigating the tragedy of the shooting, they're having to do a separate investigation of the police officers' actions and timelines. So they've got two different situations going on. And as we heard in the news conference, at first, a couple days ago, there was a school police officer on site. Now we're finding out that there was not. So the situation and the facts of who was there and where they were at what time still changing, or not changing, but still coming out. And so that's a whole separate investigation. And right now, I don't want to judge anybody because, like I said, I don't have as many facts as the director there, the commander. So I can't say for certain.
Okay. Well, that's why we know McCraw said that was the wrong decision. So he is laying blame there, which was a stunning admission for these parents who are in so much pain right now, to learn that the response was also flawed in that moment. This is an ongoing story. CBS will have ongoing coverage of the Robb Elementary School shooting, which is now the second deadliest school shooting in American history. 19 children killed, 2 teachers also murdered, 21 in total, all in 2 classrooms side by side. Our coverage on CBS News continues on your streaming and local news, and tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Margaret Brennan in Washington.
Yes. Yes, they did. He shot, and I went through the timeline before, where he continued to shoot periodically, sporadically. The last, I think I already gave you the timeline. I'm sure I went through it, but the last time that the shot right before the entry, okay, was he shot at 12:21. So. No, not at the children. Well, I'll tell you what, we don't know yet. We believe it was at the door, is what he fired at.
Go ahead, right there. Yes. Hold on.
Okay, well, we know that beginning when the BORTAC agents arrived, they had 3 ballistic shields.
Last question. What? Last question.
Where's my children?
Hold on.
I don't know.
You're good.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I'm good. Let's answer the question.
What do you think you should have done that you didn't?
Well, I've already said that.
Sir.
First of all, Texas embraces and teaches, okay, the active shooter doctrine. The active shooter doctrine, as long as there's kids, as long as there's someone's firing, you go to the gun, you find them, you neutralize them, period. And there's only, there are some nuances with transition to a barricaded subject. Also transitioning to a hostage situation, and of course the decision at the scene was that this is still a barricaded subject that did not go back to an active shooter situation.
Go ahead.
Where
Yeah.
is the police chief, and why is he here to take our questions?
Well, because I'm here to address the latest timeline and facts that we know. You're certainly welcome to reach out to them. Yeah. I defer to. You want to get the question?
Hold on.
All right, then that's fine.
How many children were pulled out?
Hold on.
Sir, you've now been on the scene for several days. Two things. What exactly is your role in this investigation? And hearing all this, and given that the FBI goes through lengthy efforts to study active shooter situations like this, do you think this is something that requires an independent investigation by whether a federal agency or by you guys or someone else?
Thank you for the question. So my name is Oliver Rich. I'm the special agent in charge of the San Antonio division. First, I want to say I understand there are a lot of questions and there's a lot of frustration in the public, and our heart goes out to the families and the victims in this tragedy. I will say our role here remains the same. We are here to assist in this investigation, to provide the support to the community to the best of our ability. We've had 200 people here for over 4 days. We have people working all across the country to support this community and to support this investigation. We are continuing in that vein. We have victim specialists here working with people in the community, and we will continue to do that. If the facts bear out that there is a federal nexus, then the FBI will conduct an appropriate investigation at that time. But for now, we continue in this to support the Texas Rangers.
How many more questions?
Two more questions.
All right, 2 more questions.
You gotta be careful. Okay.
Yes.
Uvalde Police Department, Stephen Nabila, Horror News. Uvalde Police Department posted in February 2020 that they familiarized themselves with the school and they did the training to do just what they were supposed to do. How come they were not in lead, or their commanding officer was not in lead when they were familiarized with this training, and they should have done what they were posting on Facebook they were doing? Who dropped the ball?
Yeah, I don't have the answer to that question.
All right, last question. Randy Grayson.
President Biden will be here on Sunday. Your thoughts on that? Do you have a message for the president?
Yeah, welcome here. Welcome to Texas. And this community has been hit hard. And I think it's noble that the president's going to be here to recognize the pain and suffering that this community is going through. And I think that's what leadership is. That's why Governor Abbott's here. That's why leaders go to where the problem is. And right now, the problem is in Uvalde, Texas.
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.